I think it's okay now. Yeah.
Okay. You can see here from the slide that I mentioned Westlands Primary School. Not many people will bother with recalling their primary school. But let me tell you that I am extremely proud of my Westlands school ties. In fact, my friends and I have a blog called the Westlands Primary Class of 1965. You can see from this slide too that my career spanned 3 companies. Straits Echo Press was the publisher of the National Echo, a newspaper that is now defunct in Malaysia. I was there for only 6 months before joining Ban Hinley Bank, which by the way also no longer exists. It was taken over by Southern Bank in 2000, which in turn was taken over by the CIMB Group in 2006. When I left the banking industry after 24 long years, I moved to jobstreet.com. I retired from jobstreet.com at the end of 2009. Now free to do whatever I wanted, I became an estate planner and began writing wills for people. Next slide, please, Jeff. Jeff? Thanks. But then in 2010, I got a call from an old schoolmate asking me to help out with a heritage project in Penang. By then, Georgetown had been granted World Heritage status by UNESCO in 2008. The heritage project that he wanted done was to map out 10 heritage sites along Pitt Street, which is also known as the Street of Harmony. So I began researching these sites, reacquainting myself with Penang's history, talked to shareholders, stakeholders, and owners, attended meetings with the Georgetown World Heritage Incorporated, took many photographs, did the writing many times over, and etc. Eventually, we completed everything in mid-2011 and handed over the electronic brochures, directional road signs, and plaques. I think it's plaques. I'm proud to say that the directional road signs and plaques can still be seen along the Street of Harmony. The Georgetown World Heritage Incorporated has extended the designs for use elsewhere in the inner city. At about the same time, I began to get more involved with the OFA and PFS activities. It was at the OFA dinner in 2011 that I was approached by Molly Uy to collaborate with her on rescuing the OFA coffee table book. Initially, the management committee had employed someone else to do the book, but increasingly, the management committee had become unhappy with the direction which the writer wanted it to take. So Molly had been asked to take over the project, and she approached me to work together with her. We spent about 4 months on the project. We divided tasks between us. Notably, I covered the history of the OFA in Penang, and she did a brief history of the school based on whatever information available at that time. Together, we worked on the other 2 sections on past and present alumni. Fidelis was launched in March 2012 at the ceremony in the ENO Hotel by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Tuanku Sirajuddin, who himself is an OFA. Although I wasn't aware of it then, Fidelis became the initial groundwork for the PFS Bicentenary project. Because I was still constantly updating myself with the history of PFS, despite the Fidelis project having ended, in 2014, I was formally commissioned by the Bicentenary Committee to write a book on the school. Eventually, Let the Isles Proclaim was launched in 2016 by Tuanku Sirajuddin at the Bicentenary celebrations. In 2017, I received a request from my schoolmate to help out with the Pfs Leadership Workshops. By 2019, we completed our 10 videos on the PFS history. I shall talk about them later. In mid-2018, I began discussions with the Yap family in Penang on documenting the history of Ban Hindi Bank, but the project did not materialize until about a year later. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck and movement control orders were imposed on the country, I took advantage of the situation to interview people and write the history of the bank. I was rather thankful for the direction the technology was taking, because through applications like WhatsApp and Zoom, I could talk with people in Ipoh, Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore without having to visit these places or incurring travel expenses. 10,000 Prosperities, literal translation of Ban Hindi, was completed in 2021. Jeff, next, please. But now I wish to talk more about, go back, please. But now I wish to talk more about Let the Owls Proclaim, how I went about writing this book. First, there was a search for information. One of the first things I discovered was that existing information on the internet was not reliable. Erroneous information tended to be copied and repeated from one website to another. Even Wikipedia proved unreliable. All too brief information, including wrong information, which if you tried to correct them, would get a warning message from their self-proclaimed Wikipedia administrators, who would threaten to block your access to their website, as if they know best and they know everything. Nowadays, I don't bother with a Wikipedia entry on Penang Free School anymore. Next, Jeff. Second, a very important source of information came from Marcus Langdon. He's a well-respected local historian in Penang, author of many books. He is British, but lived a long time in Australia. In the last decade or so, he has made Penang his home. In 2014, he had already published the first volume of his 4-volume book set, titled Penang, the Fourth Presidency of India, 1805 to 1830. I had heard from some source that in his second volume, there was a chapter on the Prince of Wales Island Free School. No prize for guessing correctly what that meant. So I reached out to him, told him that I was researching for my own book on the history of Penang Free School. Was there any information he could share on the free school's early years? And guess what? He offered me his draft manuscript, the whole chapter. I was astounded. How generous could he be? I hardly knew him. And he trusted me enough with this draft, even before his volume 2 came out. I made sure he was properly acknowledged and Let the Owls Proclaim. Next, Jeffrey. And that's me in the picture with him. That's Marcus Langdon. Third, next please. The National Library of Singapore. I'd known about this resource since the Fidelis days. I now turn to this portal again. A good thing about the online newspaper section of the National Library of Singapore is that it has reproduced newspaper stories dating back to, I think, the 1840s. Penang Free School was such a dominant school then that the newspapers carried columns upon columns of news about it. Today, if I were to make a search on the website, at least 2,500 entries on Penang Free School appear. Of course, this compares nothing with the 30,000 entries that they have on Raffles Institution. But the 2,005 plus entries enable me to piece together the school's history till about 1990. Remarkable, isn't it? Considering the Straits Times and other newspaper titles were or are Singapore-based newspapers. Next, please. Fourth, I made frequent trips to the school archives, looked up the old school magazines, old school registers, with minutes of the Board of Trustees and the Board of Governors meetings. There were even old newspaper clippings on Hargreaves. Unfortunately, information on a school prior to the Japanese occupation was scanned. I realize now that during the occupation period, the Japanese and the Indian Nationalist Army had burned a lot of the school books and furniture. History gone up in smoke, and very, very unfortunate. Finally, the rare book section of the Penang Library. Luckily, I found old school magazines which I couldn't locate elsewhere, and that filled in a lot of the blanks for me also. I took immense joy locating information from out-of-print books about Penang. There were also microfilm versions of old Straits Echo newspapers. And guess what? I even found old letters by Dr. William Tay that had somehow ended up in the Penang Library. Okay, now I wish to tell you some short anecdotes from the book itself. Next, please. As you know, this is the back of the school hall. Opinon Hall, as I would like to call it. Our old headmaster, Pun Po Kong, had recorded in the school register that the Board of Governors had accepted his proposal in 1969 to name the hall after Pin Hon. At the back of the hall are all those huge wooden plaques. The one above the doorway honors the donors who gave money to build the old school building in Parker Street. This old school building eventually became Hutchings School and then the State Museum building. If you go inside the building, you can still see the original marble plaques there. On the far left, the two plaques honor the people who had donated scholarship money. Next to it is a plaque listing the Hutchings scholars. Then the next three long plaques are those of the head boys. To the right is a plaque of Queen scholars. On the far right, the top plaque lists the headmasters, and below it, the Board of Governors. On the opposite side of the hall, on both sides of the stage, are plaques honoring the long service teachers. Next, please. What I want to say here concerns the headmaster's plaque. I don't have a picture of it, but this reproduction from Let the Owls Proclaim will have to be a good substitute. The names are broadly categorized into three. One, the early unqualified schoolmasters. Two, the qualified European headmasters. And three, the Malaysian headmasters. I mentioned in passing that the list is incomplete, missing a few names here and there. My book would have filled in some of the blanks and details. Next, please. Now, I wish to bring to your attention the first named person on the plaque. It is listed there as J. Cox. However, nowhere in Penang's early history was there ever a person with this name. However, confirmed by Marcus Langdon, there was a schoolmaster with Cox as his surname, but he was a William Cox. There was nobody named J. Cox. This erroneous information has been repeated elsewhere too often, including in OFA Singapore's own commemorative book, Live Free. William Cox moved over from Madras and was employed by the school committee in mid-1816. He lived in Love Lane, and the school committee had used his house as the first premises of the school until permanent premises were built in 1821. Today, nobody knows the exact location of this house, but I suspect it could have been behind the present-day Assumption Church. Next, please. While employed at the school as a schoolmaster, he bought over the Prince of Wales Island Gazette sometime in 1817. Next, please, Jeff. And this was a newspaper's publisher for many years. I'm actually amused that Cox is generally better known as a newspaperman than a schoolmaster. Okay, next, please, Jeff. I'm sure you recognize the crest, especially the first one on the left. The second one, well, it belongs to the St. Xavier's Institution. As you know, we have a long and fierce rivalry with SXI. Whatever rivalry you may have had in the past during your own school days, I hope it has ended by now. A few of my own close friends are old Xaverians. But I want to ask, when was the first recorded Cold War between Penang Free School and St. Xavier's Institution? Do you know? Before I answer my own question, I want to stress that right from day one, Penang Free School has been a public school, never a mission school. Although Robert Spark Hutchings was an Anglican clergyman who founded the Prince of Wales Island Free School, it was established in 1816 by public charter, with subscriptions from the public to keep the school going. The members of the school committee were all prominent members of the European society in those days. Men of commerce and men of letters, not men of the cloth. In the school charter, there were some specific conditions to address sensitivities of parents. For instance, it was laid down that great care should be taken that the sentiments of parents averse to the Christian religion should not by any means be violated. In July 1823, a Catholic priest named Jean-Baptiste Beauchot accused the schoolmaster, George Porter, of punishing Catholic boys for not turning up for service at the Protestant church. The accusation was dismissed by the school committee, and a rebuke was issued to Beauchot for his interference in the children's education. The accusations continued to flow between the two parties until the end of the year, when the settlement government deemed enough was enough. So in January 1826, in order to defuse the situation, the government allocated $100 per month towards a new Catholic school. Beauchot called his school the Catholic Free School and ordered all the Catholic children to leave the Prince of Wales Island Free School for his. The school committee continued to remonstrate against Beauchot, but the government ordered a stop to all the exchanges, saying that it would never end otherwise. Of course, the Catholic Free School was a precursor of the present St. Xavier's Institution. Next. My third story concerns the scouting movement in Penang. In 1908, an experimental scouting movement began at the YMCA in Logan Road. This YMCA Penang had been set up by the Reverend George Plaque, founder of the Anglo-Chinese School, the present-day Methodist Boys' School, Methodist Girls' School. Behind this photograph was an attestation by Goh Guan Ho that the picture was taken in July 1908 at the YMCA Penang. Now, this Goh Guan Ho was a lawyer who had been a former president of the Georgetown Municipal Council in 1956. He was an eminent member of the Penang Society. However, some Singapore scouters were claiming that this photo was taken at Fort Canning in Singapore in 1908, meaning that the scouting movement began in Singapore and not in Penang. Goh Guan Ho was identified as a person standing on the far right in this picture. However, recent evidence has emerged that Goh Guan Ho was still a student in Penang in 1908. He was then the head boy of Anglo-Chinese School, which means that the photo must have been taken in Penang, not Singapore. I won't go further into this matter, however, and shall leave it to the scouting movements of both countries to resolve amicably. Next, please. Now you should know this person or at least have heard of him. None other than Harold Cheeseman. As a 17-year-old man, he arrived in Penang to join Penang Free School in 1907. He started a school magazine in 1909. The narration has it that he started the Scout movement at Pfs in 1915. He became the headmaster of the New Northern Road Government English School in 1922. Cheeseman eventually turned out to be a very important figure in the annals of education in Malaya and Singapore. In 1923, he turned to administration and became the Penang Inspector of Schools. In 1938, he was promoted to be Chief Inspector of Schools. 1 year later, 1938, Deputy Director of Education. Then came the Japanese occupation. While interned at Changi Prison from 1942, he organized classes to educate the internees. After the war, he was made Director of Education in 1945. This was a position he held until his retirement from government service in 1948. He died in Ramsgate, England in 1961. Like I mentioned earlier, it has always been accepted that Cheeseman started the Scouting movement at Penang Free School. Next, please. In 1915. However, I've recently found a newspaper clipping from 1910, which specifically mentioned Penang Boy Scouts consisting of free school boys. So is it 1910 or 1915? So again, what's the real story regarding scouting in Penang Free School? I guess you shall never know for sure. An interesting conundrum, but really no big deal. Next, please. Today, the legacy of Harold Cheeseman is remembered in 4 ways in Penang. First of all, there is Cheeseman Road, across from the Penang Free School. Second, we have a sport house called Cheeseman House in Penang Free School. Third, there's a sport house at Bukit Mertajam High School. That's also called Cheeseman House. And fourth, I come full circle back to Westlands Primary School, where, surprise, surprise, there is a Cheeseman Hall. Today, Westlands Primary School, which started in 1935, no longer exists. In its place is a Westlands Center for Sports Excellence. However, the Cheeseman Hall still stands. And now, next please, Jeff. Next please. Okay, stop. And now I'd like to say something about the Pfs Leadership Workshops. It was a year after the bicentenary. In 2017, I was approached by a schoolmate to see whether I would be interested to join him in the program to give something back to the school. I was interested. Immediately, I said yes to him. So we rounded up a few more people and we sat down to discuss what we could do. Eventually, we decided to hold leadership workshops for the students to prepare them for the future. We requested the school to provide us with a list of potential candidates for the workshops. We asked for boys from Form 4 and Form 5 who are either prefects or holding top positions in the school societies or uniform bodies. We subjected them to interviews, asking them questions to gauge their levels of commitment towards the workshops. Because the workshops weren't going to be easy 1-hour talking sessions. No, we were planning the workshops to be intensive, held over 2 weekends, 4 days, Saturday and Sunday, times 2, 9 hours per day. Eventually, we extended the workshops to the Form 6 students. So over 4 years, we managed to hold 6 workshops, with each workshop confined to a maximum of 25 students. I think altogether, about 120 students benefited. We coached them on leadership skills, and we had a wide array of competent coaches and speakers, all fees, all giving their time willingly for free. Corporate figures. We had a medical doctor and a dentist. We had a university professor, a director of social services from London, a professional trainer. In 2018, we decided to supplement the workshops with video material. So we decided on making 10 short videos of 3 to 8 minutes duration on the history of Penang Free School, based on the contents of my book. Both the workshops and videos naturally cost money to produce, and we had to seek external funds to help us along. Of course, we did not expect to cover the production expenses totally, but if we could recover some of the expenditure, it would remove a big load from us. So we approached friends and contacts in the 3 OFAs in Penang, Singapore, and KL Selangor. We pitched to them, challenging them to put their money where their mouths were. After all, it was to be for the good of the school, for the good of the present day boys and girls. You may say that the school is no longer what it used to be, but to be sure, there are always potential leaders, the bright sparks among them whom we can still help to nurture. We had satisfactory responses to our appeal from Penang and KL Selangor, but nothing from Singapore, despite us personally coming down here to talk directly with the contacts. Nonetheless, with what we managed to collect, we finished the 10 projects within budget. Barring any technical problem, I hope to screen one of them to you today. But first, here are some pictures to showcase what the leadership workshops were all about. So Jeff, can we please continue with the PowerPoint? Yeah, so that is the end of my presentation. I shall now attempt to show you one of the videos that were made in 2018, 2019.